Hello everyone, my name is Lucas Perez. I'm the Education and Public Programs Assistant at SDMA, and today I'm going to teach you about pigments. And pigments are basically powdered minerals that are the basic component of paint. Now, before tube paint was invented in the 19th century, all artists had to mix their own paints using pigments and some kind of sticky medium, which could be egg yolk, could be rabbit skin glue. There's a lot of different options, which we'll talk about later when I teach you guys a little bit about how to mix together your own pigments to make your own paint. Very, very exciting. So we're going to go through a couple of different colors today, and it's interesting because the colors have their own histories, which are very ancient. And we're going to begin with red. Now, red has a lot of different colors. Today we're going to use a controversial one, which is vermilion. Here's a little jar of vermilion. Now, vermilion comes from a mineral called cinnabar, which is actually also used in red Chinese lacquerware. And the reason why I say it's controversial is because vermilion contains levels of mercury. Okay. There are actually famous examples of, or famous stories, I should say, of Japanese painters, ancient, I should say, Japanese painters that used too much vermilion and slowly sort of went insane because the mercury that's contained in this type of pigment. Vermilion also was used in some cases as women's rouge or lipstick, and obviously that also is extremely toxic. So let's move on now to blue. Blue, excellent. And blue traditionally was always a hard to obtain color. There's only a few options for blue as far as where you can get it from. And probably the most famous of the ancient examples is this one here. This is ultramarine. And you could see here in the camera that it's super bright, right? It's almost like a neon blue. It's got kind of a purplish hue to it as well. The reason why this is hard to obtain and also quite expensive, even ancient and even today, just a couple of grams of ultramarine will set you back quite a bit of money, is because it's made of lapis lazuli. And anyone who's done a bit of lapidary work would know that lapis lazuli is a semi-precious stone used in jewelry. So kind of interesting. And so you can see here that the color is very, very vibrant, but it's also a light fast color. So this blue will stay incredibly vibrant for hundreds and hundreds of years without turning or the color degrading over time. Okay, great. So let's move on to green. Okay, green's an awesome color, favorite of a lot of different people. And I chose this one today because I think it's really interesting how they derive it, and this particular pigment is called verdigris. And the way that they obtain this particular pigment is they apply acetic acid to sheets of bronze or sheets of copper, and then basically that oxidizes the copper, and then you can scrape off that green patina that forms over the top, and you get this fantastic, beautiful sort of red, white, greenish color. And there are, again, other ways of deriving a green pigment, including using malachite, which is another semi-precious stone, as you might know. I always say that these ancient pigments, when you paint with them, it's almost like you're making jewelry, right? In a lot of cases, they use gold leaf too. So it really is interesting that there's a lot of different parallels between those two different things. All right, so let's move now to one of the colors that's not as light fast as the others and that you don't find in a lot of different traditional painting, and that's yellow. Yellow, you'll see yellow ochres and stuff like that, which is a more brownish yellow, but the really, really vibrant yellows that we know today, like the cadmium yellow, for example, weren't invented until the 19th century. There is one exception to that rule, and that is gamboge, and I have a little chunk of it here. It comes from a tree, it's the resin from a tree, and it does create the most fantastic yellow pigment. Let me show you, for example. I'm going to put a little bit of water on my finger, and I'm going to apply to the gamboge, and this is just, again, tree resin. You can see how incredibly vibrant that is. I'm going to put it on a piece of paper here, and it creates this beautiful pigment. Now, the problem with gamboge, though, is that it'll actually turn brown and then eventually black. It can start browning if you don't apply it correctly within 5 or 6 years. So artists who use gamboge know this and actually maybe incorporate that into the work. And again, one of the advantages to using pigments is that you have a little bit of more control over the paints that you're creating. When you use a tube paint, it's created for you. You can do things to it to kind of create more control over it, but not as much control as you can if you make from pigments. Okay, so let's move right along. Now we're going to move to the browns, and two pigments that you might know from your own paint set that are actually very, very ancient pigments are raw umber and sienna, and they're two kind of different versions of brown. And you'll notice that those two colors, when you go to the paint store, will have two companions to those, and those are the burned colors, right? The burned sienna, the burned umber. Now, I have a jar of raw umber here. And again, raw umber comes from mineral-rich clay, so it's considered an earth pigment. And here is the burned umber. Now, what's interesting about the burned part, I think a lot of confusion, there's a lot of confusion about what that burned part means. And it doesn't mean that they light it on fire or, or they bake it or anything. They actually, well, in my case, what I do when I'm making my own burned pigments is I use a little fry pan like this, and I actually use this to create darker versions of my own pigments. And you put a little bit of the pigment in here, and you give it a little stir, and you slowly watch it, and you darken it to the level where you want. And again, one of the advantages to using these pigments is that you can get a lot more control over the pigments. So once this has gotten black or blacker, then this becomes burned umber, and you can burn a bunch of different colors. You can burn blue, for example, and create a wonderfully rich black that's from a dark blue from lapis lazuli. So it's really cool to do these burned colors also. Let's move on to white. Where's my white pigment? Have you seen that white pigment? Kittens do not make good white pigments. May I have the correct one? Excellent, thank you. So there are a lot of different white pigments. Probably the most famous is lead white, which is another toxic pigment, but this particular one is non-toxic and it's called gofun. It's ground up conch shell, and it's actually medicinal. It's put in some lotions, and it'll help alleviate the signs of stretch marks in some skins. So the only problem with this particular white is that it is not color fast, so over time it will degrade and turn brown and then eventually black. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the second part of this video where I'm actually going to show you how to mix these pigments together. Let's do it. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to teach you the traditional method I learned, and that's usually where we use deerskin glue. And here it's been turned into a jello material and then basically dried. So we need to rehydrate that. But before we do that, we need to break this apart into a couple of pieces. So I usually use a thick rag. I'm going to cover it up. The reason why I do this is because when I snap it, you hear that snap? It creates a lot of little sharp pieces, you can see here. So what we'll do is we'll usually take a little jar, we put the dried piece in there, and we add a little bit of water, and then we put this in the fridge overnight. What will happen is this will reconstitute or rehydrate, and I have a sample of what it looks like once it's been rehydrated. You could see it becomes sort of gelatinous. It's almost like I say, like a jello. And this is, again, rehydrated deerskin glue. So the way that we're going to melt this to use it as a glue, let me just clean this up really quick. There we go. Is we're going to do a double boil method. Okay, so you're going to use this like a little metal bowl like that. Works really well. And I just kind of take the jar and put it in there. I'm going to put some hot water in it, and I want to fill it up towards the top of the bowl, but don't overflow it. And I'm going to let this sit. And what's going to happen is it's going to melt, but because we're leaving it in the jar and not melting it directly in the water, none of the water is going to dilute the glue. Okay, there we go. It's all melted now, and you could see that it's turned into like a liquid. You could see it's completely liquidy. Fantastic. Now, we can't use this because it has little imperfections, little pieces that are still stuck inside of this. So what we're going to have to do is filter this. So the method I usually like to use is to take another little jar, and I'm going to go ahead and put a little towel here on the ground, because if you get this glue on anything, it'll never come off. Okay, and I like to use empty tea bags as filters. You can buy these online for those tea aficionados out there. You probably know this really well. You can put your own teas in there, but it also works great as a glue strainer. Okay, so I'm going to kind of just put it over the top of the jar and kind of secure it by leaving a little overhang on the top of the lid. You can see here. Okay, and now I'm going to pour in my glue, and I want to do this kind of slowly so that it works its way through the filter, okay? And what you're going to be left with is very, very pure glue, and it's going to be the stickiest stuff basically of the glue is going to be left at the bottom here, okay? So I'm going to keep working this. Again, kind of going slow, letting it do its thing, and pour the rest of it. And again, really, you might even want to use gloves when you're making this stuff because it's really, really sticky. Some of you guys know that you've probably seen Elmer's glue. I have a little jar of Elmer's glue, and it has a little cow on the front of it because it's usually made with cow parts, so like the horns, the hides, and that type of thing. So there we go. We got our glue. Be really careful when you remove the filter. Okay, so now that we have our glue ready, we got to get our pigment, and I was going to choose my favorite color of all time, which in this case is hot pink. There you go. So a little goes a long way, and I only put a little bit in here. So this will probably create quite a bit of pigment, or quite a bit of paint rather, okay? So I have a little special jar, a little special spoon, sorry, and I'm just gonna add just a very small amount. Like with most things, you can add more, but you cannot take out once you've added too much. So I'm gonna go drop by drop. So you can see very little amount. There you go, like 2 or 3 drops. And then again, if I need more, I can add more. The traditional method that I use is by using these little white plates, although in ancient times they would have used abalone shells or little ceramic plates, earthenware plates, that kind of thing. I like these white mixing plates because you can see the color, what it'll look like when there's a white canvas behind it or white paper behind it. So it's really great. And also you'll get a much better idea of what kind of color you're mixing. And I'm gonna just start mixing. I use my middle finger because it's a little stronger than your index finger, and you'll be surprised if you're mixing big quantities of this pigment. It's like really, really much like an arm workout, your upper arm workout. All right, let's keep going. There we go, almost done. And again, you can see it's getting a little dry, so I'm going to add 1 more drop. And I'm going to go, at this point, drop by drop, because again, if you add too much of the deerskin glue, it'll turn shiny, and then it'll form almost like a plastic crust over the top of the paint, which will crack really quickly. Like within 5 or 6 years, you'll get this sort of craquelure effect on the top layer. And you can see that the pigment becomes activated when you put the glue in it, so that it becomes a lot more vibrant. In its powder form, it's not that vibrant, right? Okay, there we go. Now, obviously, I can't use it like this because it's really, really sticky. It's all just pigment and glue. So I need to add a little bit of water to this. So I have my cute little water container. And same principle here. I can always add more. It's difficult to pull out. So I'm going to just put a couple little drops in there. And then I'm going to work the paint again. And now it's going to be a little more waterier, I don't know if that's a correct word, waterier, so that we can use it as a paint, right? There we go. I'm going to just wipe off my finger. Let me clean up a little bit. Move this over here. Great. And there we have our beautiful pink pigment. Okay, so let's try it in action. I have a little piece of paper here. My lovely brush. And just kind of load the brush. All right, there you go. That's how you mix pigments. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that video. We upload every week, so check back soon for more content.